Sauce the boss in the building. 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 Sauce the boss in the building.
Are you born this way or are you
The
made?
boss in the
It's mostly made, but there's a little bit of born. And
What's the percentage on that?
if I were to spitball, I'm going to go with like an 80-20 or a 90-10 in terms of made versus born. I mean, the inborn part is that because the fact of the matter is we see people come from invalidating early environments or overindulged or spoiled early environments, and they don't turn out narcissistic. So there's got to be something else at play, right? And that's probably where that temperamental piece comes in. Kids who are likely more hypersensitive, hyper-emotional. If you look at Marsha Linehan's work on borderline personality disorder, she actually talks about that mix between the biological vulnerability plus the invalidation of the early environment. There's likely something like that happening in narcissism too, but it's mostly made. So let's view it as almost concentric circles, and let's start at the middle circle, which is really what happens in the family when the child is first growing up. Children who don't get consistent emotional mirroring from their parents, that's a setup for becoming a narcissist later on, because that's how children learn to regulate their emotional worlds. They learn how to self-soothe their emotions. They learn how to take responsibility for their emotions. They learn how to understand their emotions from how they're mirrored by their parents. And if their parents have consistent, appropriate reactions and are available to them, that's how the child learns that. So if a child, for any number of reasons, doesn't have that kind of consistent feedback from their parents, the parents are distracted, the parents are absent, the parents don't care, the parents are addicted to drugs and are not available in that way, all of those could be contributors to that. Parents just are abusive in some way. Obviously, that can be a contributor too to inconsistent kinds of mirroring. And then the child doesn't learn, like I said, to sort of regulate their own emotion. They keep looking to the environment for validation because frankly, they're confused. We also think about narcissism in the early environment as a function of attachment. Children who have secure, healthy attachments tend to go on to adulthood and make more secure, healthy attachments. But kids who have more anxious or avoidant attachments, that can set the tone for attachment issues in adulthood. And they're not able to make those kinds of successful attachments in adulthood. So their relationships are really fraught with lots of in and out, back and forth, rather than the consistency you'd see from a secure attachment with a parent. The other thing I often say is that parents who create narcissistic kids who go on to become narcissistic adults, we see a pattern of simultaneous overindulgence and underindulgence. And what I mean by that is these are the kids where if they do the sport their parent wants, or get the straight A's, or the prima ballerina dancer, or whatever it is they do, the best violin player, whatever, or they want to take over dad's business, whatever the thing they say they want to do, if the parents can get a good public face from it, they will overindulge the kid in that way. They'll drive them to every practice. They'll go out of their way. But when that child has an emotional need that needs to be met, the parents are nowhere to be found. Like they're interested when their kid's on stage, they're interested when their kid's on the field, they're interested when the child's getting an honor or doing what they want to do. But when that kid really needs their emotional needs to be met, it's completely an impoverished environment. That's what I mean by being over and underindulged. It's also what we call modeling. It's what they see in their environment. If they watch a parent constantly be entitled, they're going to learn to be entitled. If they watch a parent who has no empathy, they're not going to learn empathy. Empathy is learned in childhood. You cannot teach a 30-year-old how to be empathic. That's an early game.
So that was my question, because if you were saying that 80 to 90% of becoming a narcissist was taught, then certainly later we could unteach it. But we can't.
No, because you know what ends up happening is that ultimately these environments for children are inconsistent. They're invalidating. At the worst of it, they can be abusive and dehumanizing.
Right.
And that's the heartbreak, is that I've worked with more than a few folks who are adult narcissists who did come from abusive, invalidating, downright dehumanizing
who have
homes.
narcissistic personality disorder.
Who have narcissistic personality disorder. So their early lives were really, really sort of wretched. And that's heartbreaking, but that's still not a get out of jail free card for treating other people badly. Like I'm not down with that. And so, but now let's take that. Now we're in the family, but we got to push this out a little bit. Society is to blame too. We tell kids it's okay at some level to behave. As long as you win, You got into Harvard Junior? Great, whatever it took to get there. As long as we start saying that you can shelve important qualities like compassion, kindness, respect, mutuality, empathy, as long as you're telling people it's okay to put that stuff away, as long as you succeed, our achievement-oriented culture is a contributor to these patterns for sure. Because we're almost saying empathy is a waste of time as long as you get straight A's. You know, who needs kindness when you can write code? That's not going to fly. You know, so that's the other reason we're seeing more and more of this. And then you add things like social media and the kinds of things society values into the mix. Then that's it. I mean, it's a perfect storm. That's what I'm saying. You got the family, you've got the community, you've got the culture at large. And then you have a little bit of individual temperament thrown in there, forget about it.
When you hear how narcissism is conditioned, I'm surprised that it's only 1 to 3% of the population that has it.
Remember, that's narcissistic personality disorder, which requires that person to have had problems in their life because of it, awareness of it, and feel like it's caused them trouble. Because narcissism works as a pattern in our society too often, they don't feel a lot of distress.
So when you were talking about parents mirroring or kids mirroring their parents, there are certain behaviors that I grew up with, right, and my parents that I...
Make your browser fast. Make your browser safe. Make your browser Chrome. Choose Google Chrome for your computer.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done.
Did until my mid-20s. And then I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not healthy for me. It's not nice. I'm not going to do it. And so I changed. So why is it that I can change an undesirable behavior, but someone who has narcissistic personality disorder can't change?
Because the core conflict is that insecurity, that discomfort with themselves, that sense of emptiness. That's what has to be addressed. So you may have seen that, but it clearly didn't result in that kind of core insecurity perhaps in you. So when you were doing the yelling, it's like, well, this is how it's done. And you're like, whoa, maybe this other person feels sad when I'm yelling at them. This isn't okay. So you were able to have that correction because A, you were able to engage in empathy, and B, you may not have had that core insecurity. Remember, the narcissist is absolutely reliant on the world for validation at all times. When we need someone, we resent them. You know, a child doesn't, but the child grows. You think about an adolescent. Every adolescent out there resents their parents. Why do they resent their parents? Because they kind of still need them. They kind of still need them to be a mom, but like, I want you to be my mom. I don't want you to be my mom. And they go back and forth and then they hate you. You know, so it's that resentment comes from need. And it's one thing to be 5. Of course you need your parents. That's built in. But when you're 35, 45, and you need people to tell you you're great all the time, you may not be aware of that need, but you are aware that you're reliant on the world. And that if you're having a bad day, that the only way to spring out of it is to get validation from the world. That stinks. So that's why it's very difficult to change. It's not just about modeling empathy. And there is an interesting concept out there, and it's something actually even in my social media, someone that we've engaged on about this idea of cognitive empathy. You can teach people, like, that's how he feels. Okay, got it. Do you understand why that would feel bad? Got it. That's almost intellectualized, and it's a little bit different than being in the emotional muck with someone. I don't think
like acting.
It's not. No, it's not acting. It's knowing, but it's not getting. You see what I'm saying?
No,
I know why this person would feel upset right now. I know that. Might even get it a little bit, but I'm not feeling it so much so that it'll stop my behavior in the future. So it's like a half of a fix. And when you're really in a close, intimate relationship with someone, and the best they can come up with is like, I suppose I understand why you feel that way, but they're still not like, and they're not emotionally there with you. It's incredibly unsatisfying.
It's kind of like when somebody says, well, I'm sorry if you feel that way.
Yes, narcissist mantra. I'm sorry you feel that way.
That's not an apology.
That's not an apology. Exactly.
You have been in a relationship with a narcissist?
Myself, yes, of course.
Okay.
In different areas too. Intimate relationships, familial relationships, work relationships, but just so all of Mexico knows, it's not my ex-husband. He's actually a great guy.
We love the ex-husband.
We love my ex-husband.
So because I'm curious, because if 80 to 90% is taught, Were you hyper aware raising your kids to not raise a narcissist?
My ex-husband and I, when we were raising our kids, the one thing we 100% agreed upon, he's like, Romany, we have a lot of things we have to get right, but we looked at each other and said, the one thing we must make sure we focus on above all else, because we only get one chance to get this right, is empathy. We didn't care how they did in school. We didn't care if they didn't eat their vegetables. We didn't care if they watched television 10 hours a day. We just needed them to be empathic. And there was that fine day when they were about 8 or 9 years old. I'm like, no, we got it.
Hold on, I have so many questions. Was your ex-husband a mental health professional? Yeah. Okay, so you have
it's not
so
like
these kids have two like world-renowned mental health experts parenting them, and the two of you both agreed that empathy was number one.
Empathy is everything.
This is huge for parents to get.
It's huge because I'll tell you, it's the core of why kids bully. All the problems we have with kids, it has to be about empathy. Am I telling you my kids have had the most smooth ride? No one's kids are. I mean, and they're horribly mean to me because they're teenagers. But I will say that I can see in their face when they go one line too far as a teenager and they say that one mean thing and they see my face change. Immediately, the empathy overtakes them quicker than their words do. Their face changes. I've watched my daughters interact with people, and I'll watch how quickly their face will change when they sense another human being in need. And at those points, I do heave that sigh of relief. Whatever path they take, I do know that they're hyper aware of, not hyper aware like in a neurotic way, but they're very aware of the needs and the feelings of other people, and they will shape their behavior in that way. And that was the only thing that mattered, because I wanted to put two decent, kind human beings into the world.
That's really beautiful. I bet if I lined up 100 parents and asked them, if you could only give your kid one thing, what would it be? I don't think one of them would say empathy.
That's terrible, because I'll tell you, the world has enough smart people, and it turns out they do well in school. But if I had to choose, if somebody said you could give up your kid getting into like a top college or something and trade that out for empathy, I'd be like, hell no.
Empathy.
She could go, I don't care what she does, but I would not let her give that.
Because parents are concerned, they're sharing, kindness, being honest, diligent, hardworking. I've never heard empathy.
Yeah, it was everything, the way I raised them. In fact, even how I breastfed my kids, I'm like, I'm going to stare at them face to face. I'm never going to be distracted as much as I can. In the middle of the night, I would fall asleep. Yeah. I would stare at them face to face. Like, I started that one early. I'm like, I'm mirroring these kids.
That was that important to you and your husband.
It was that important to me. It was that important.
Guys, this is huge for the parents out there getting that, because this is the leading expert on narcissism and a lot of other mental health topics. And her ex-husband both have that shared goal.
Yeah, it had to be narcissism. I mean, it had to be empathy.
Wow.
Because I think that's the pay it forward. That's going to make them better mothers. It's going to make them better partners. It's going to make them better workers. It's going to make them better leaders. It's going to make them better friends. They win everywhere on that one. That's the only quality to me that matters in a human being. And so from there, all other things would be built out, whatever they do.
Now, you briefly mentioned that around the age of 8 or 9, there was a moment that you said, oh, they got it. What was that?
I was actually watching my daughter play with another child. And then something happened with what the child was eating or interacting with. And so that child no longer had that thing. And my daughter still had it. Might have been like ice cream or something fell out of a dish.
Oh, okay.
And her face, you could see that she experienced that child's feeling before that child experienced their feeling. And you could see the hurt in her face. And then she's like, we have to help them. We have to help them. And I'm like, oh, sweetie, don't worry about it. I think she was worried about the cost. And she was even being empathic. She knew I was struggling a little financially at that point. And to buy another ice cream was going to cost money. And she's like, is it going to be okay to get them another? I said, of course, sweetheart. And then we ameliorated the situation and got a new ice cream. But her caring for me having enough money, that child suffering, it was like, it really, and she was to me like, should I cut mine in half? But I already put my germs in it. The way a kid thinks. Yeah. It was absolutely automatic for her. And, and we were very lucky. Our children went to an infant care center, actually at UCLA, where empathy was the main thing taught to them all day long. So you can build this into caregiving models of, and I think that started in infant care. It was in their preschools. It was in their K through, maybe high school, it gets harder, but it's, we'll see how it goes for them. Like I say, as teenagers, it doesn't always feel like empathy, but I see it with their friends, everyone but me. And I'm fine with that.
For now, yeah. They'll become your friends later. So 8 or 9 years old, you saw these empathetic
Even
traits.
earlier, but then it was clicked
Then
in.
you were
It was
clear with it.
automatic for them. Yeah.
When do people start to exhibit signs of narcissism?
Here's where we need to be careful. Almost by definition, all teenagers look narcissistic.
Yes.
They're deeply entitled.
Of course.
They're arrogant. They think they know
They're the
everything.
what's the type of narcissist I compared them to?
For them, you would call them maybe one of the benign narcissists.
The benign
Yeah.
narcissist,
And
yeah.
I think that's what it is.
Normal-looking photos with incredible backstories. Lena Medina gave birth at 5 years old, making her the youngest mother in recorded history. Her parents took her to the hospital when they saw an increasing abdominal size that they were worried was a tumor. The doctor quickly found that she was in her 7th month of pregnancy. 6 weeks later, Lena gave birth by C-section to a 6-pound baby boy named Gerardo, which was also the name of the doctor who helped her. The doctors found that her body had fully matured through a rare condition called precocious puberty. One doctor in a detailed report on her case said that she had her first menstrual cycle at 8 months old. Lena's father was arrested on suspicion of child abuse, but was later let go due to lack of evidence, and the father was never identified. Gerardo was raised believing that Lena was his sister until at 10 years old he found out that she was his mother. Gerardo passed away at the age of 40 due to bone marrow disease, but Lena is still alive at 88 years old. Follow for more.
Let's see if you have a phobia. I'm going to show you 5 photos. If you feel too uncomfortable to make it to the 5th photo, then you could have a phobia. So let's go. Number 1. Feeling uncomfortable yet? And how about this? Nearly there. Last one. If those photos made you feel uncomfortable, then you could have a phobia, which is the fear of snakes. Follow now to see if you can make it through the next phobia test. This is why you should never put off going to the dentist. Patrick Lawler tried everything to get rid of his toothache. He tried painkillers, ice cream, but nothing seemed to help. The pain became excruciating, so he finally visited the dentist. The X-ray would reveal the source of the pain, but also cause him to break down in tears. Because unknown to Patrick, he had a 4-inch nail embedded in his skull. The 23-year-old construction worker, whilst using a nail gun, had accidentally fired the nail into his mouth. After a successful 4-hour operation, the surgeons found that the nail had plunged 1.5 inches directly into his brain. Even his doctors said, if you're going to have a nail in the brain, then that's where you want it to be. He's the luckiest guy ever.
Here are more dogs that'll send you the dog backwards. I don't care how confident you are. Once upon a time, a zoo in China tried to pass off a dog as an African lion. It didn't last long and they were surely wrong, but squint at a Tibetan Mastiff and you can see where they were coming from. They both have the personality of a plush toy and the mentality to G-check a fully grown wolf that gets out of line. Although these ones are kind of small, they just might be coyotes. But if you're not ready to handle a wolf like this, you ain't ready to match up with a Mastiff. It's a furry weapon of mass destruction with roots in the Himalayas, and they're one of the oldest breeds of dogs. At 140 pounds of fluffy fur coat, the wolfy mammoth will ruin you physically and financially. It's a Mastiff that'll have you mad stiff. Rigor mortis. You are not beating a Dogo Argentino. Great dog to have, highly intelligent, very loyal, a real dog's dog. Horrible dog to have beef with. The Flex of Argentina was bred to hunt wild boars and peccaries, and a butt-naked pale ape would be nothing. One Dogo murked a mountain lion that was threatening his 2 human girls. Same dog that'll read your kids a bedtime story. I honestly think the average man would get his cookies taken by a Rhodesian Ridgeback. Again, intelligent, independent, and loyal. They'll fully love you to death. The thing is, someone would have to die. The South African ace was bred to clear farmlands of boars and baboons. But the biggest flex is having lion hunting on their resume. Anyone who's owned one will swear about how sweet they are. But diabetes proves that sweets aren't for everyone. The wrong person will lose a foot. And really, what are we talking about? Y'all would get folded by this dog.
The UK government has just announced that they will be approving a multi-million-pound geoengineering experiment to dim the sun. Is it not dim enough already? So the British government's Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, is about to drop £50 million into experiments that aim to reflect more sunshine back into space in order to slow the effects of global warming. Now, to do this, one idea is to inject aerosols like sulfur oxides into the stratosphere so that the tiny particles reflect the sunlight. Another idea is to brighten clouds over the ocean by using ships to spray sea salt into the air to enlarge them. And a third idea is to seed certain types of clouds to allow more of Earth's heat to escape into space. Now, I don't need to tell you guys that trying to artificially alter the climate is highly controversial. However, the lead scientist said that these experiments are on a very small scale, no toxic substances will be released, and that they have strong requirements about the reversibility of effects, if any. They're likening it to when a big volcano erupts. They often blast tiny particles into the stratosphere that blocks some sunlight, and in some cases, it actually cools the planet slightly for a year or two. What they're trying to do is somewhat imitate this, but in a controlled way. However, no matter how careful they are, it is not without risks or uncertainties. In fact, in January 2022, over 60 academics published an open letter calling for a ban on developing or deploying solar geoengineering. So the question is, are we at a point with climate change where drastic measures like this need to be taken, or should this be stopped immediately?
I'm finna give you 8 facts about the T-Rex that proved he had to go. He was like King Von and nature had to get him up out of here. It had padded feet, so it did not matter how big it was. If it was hunting you, it was silent. They had better eyesight than eagles, and y'all know eagles can see for miles. It was largest land carnivore ever. That means it was eating meats, bro. Paul had an extremely high IQ. I heard some people say it was like as smart as a bamboo, and I heard someone say he has the IQ of 140. That's more than me. There's a high chance they hunted in groups. So just imagine like 10 of these just trying to hunt you down, bro. They had such a good scent. It was like 100 bloodhounds, so you was not escaping him. He could smell you for miles. They had the strongest bite force of any animal alive, bro. That is crazy. They could run up to 37 miles per hour, and that does not seem that fast, but all that means is it's going to catch you every time. And I'm going to give you an extra 2 more. 1, they were most likely cannibals and were eating each other. And 2, a new study showed that T-Rexes are probably 70% bigger than we thought.
Let's see if you have a videophobia. I'm going to show you 5 photos. If you feel too uncomfortable to make it to the 5th photo, then you could have a videophobia. So let's go. Number 1. Feeling uncomfortable yet? And how about this? Nearly there. Last one. If those photos made you feel uncomfortable, then you could have a phobia, which is the fear of snakes. Follow now to see if you can make it through the next phobia test.
One of Jeffrey Epstein's victims was just found dead, and she allegedly took her own life. This was Virginia Giuffre, and she played an instrumental part in helping bring Epstein's crimes to light. And just today, she was found dead only weeks after being hit by a vehicle and claiming she had only a few days left to live. This was the photo that she shared on her social media after her accident, and her cryptic post alarmed people. So Virginia is deeply tied into the entire Epstein story. She was a victim of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's early on, and she was actually recruited into their sex trafficking ring at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. She was approached while she was working there by Ghislaine Maxwell, and eventually found herself being trafficked by her and Epstein. Now, Virginia's most infamous accusations were leveled against Prince Andrew from England, and she claimed that she was forced to do things with him when she was just 17. She also made a lot of different allegations about a lot of different powerful men, but we'll save those for another time. Virginia dedicated her life after coming out with all of this information to fighting and advocating for victims of child sexual abuse and sex trafficking. And back in 2019, just one day after court documents were unsealed involving Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Giuffre, that was the day when Epstein was found dead in his prison cell. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. Obviously, my thoughts and prayers are with Virginia's family, but this is just absolutely horrific and shocking news.
This Bigfoot story just might make you believe, part 2. So our boy Mike was really scared. He was pretty confident that whatever was looking at him from the woods wasn't any type of creature he'd ever seen before, and that's when the animal let out a roar. Mike said it sounded like a lion, and almost immediately after the roar, he heard a loud whistle noise from about 100 feet to his right. The creature in front of him stared off in that direction, and then it too made the same exact whistling sound, and then the animal stared right back at Mike. It was as if the two animals were communicating with each other. And then suddenly, another creature that looked just like the one staring at Mike stepped out of the woods. So there were two huge ape-like creatures standing like humans staring at Mike. And that's when he took off to his car. As he was running, he looked over his shoulder and saw that one of the animals was chasing him. It was easily just as fast as Mike, but it didn't attack him. It just kept running after him. Mike made it to his car, got inside, and looked out the window. Both of the animals had followed him and were staring at him. He drove off and made it home safely.
So a question I get asked a lot is, how do slugs make love? And the real question is, how don't they? And the answer is normally. So as you know, sea slugs are like boneless snails. They're nudibranchs, they're gastropod mollusks, or as you know, sea slugs. This one's a Spanish dancer who was in Finding Nemo. They come in many colors. They also come in many colors, and in a second I will explain. Sea slugs carry both teams' equipment. They pitch and catch, but of course, they can't just do it to themselves. Sometimes two slugs will exchange the nectar of nativity to each other and head on their way. Some, like the leopard slug, will suspend themselves in midair off a string of slime and intertwine themselves while exchanging baby batter. The reason they're upside down is the leopard slug's little slugger is so big and girthy, they literally need gravity to help the slug's baby arm fall out of its head. I am the first member of my bloodline to say that. Oh, and that blue stuff's exactly what you think. Some slugs have two Johnsons, one for what you'd expect, and the other to stab their partner right between the eyes to inject a substance believed to brainwash the slug into accepting its love juice in particular and not someone else's. Traumatic insemination is the name, and that's not the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes two slugs get their Twizzlers stuck together, and the only way out is for one to chew the member off the other. It happens so often, there's a term for it, and pray your night never has to end on some apophilation. Or you know, and no one asked me to do this.
Doubt a lot of people do, but does anybody recognize these names? Michelle Gusset, Lori Farmer, and Denise Milner. These were the Girl Scouts who were attending Camp Scott in Mays County, Oklahoma when something went very wrong. One of the counselors reported hearing this strange and kind of low guttural noise in the woods during that night. And by the morning of June 13th, 1977, all three of these girls were found missing from their tent. The three of them were later found bludgeoned under a tree. You really have to understand, the county had never seen something like this. Something so gruesome, and all three of these girls being assaulted. But then police found something strange. In a cave outside of the camp, there were key pieces of evidence as well as two pictures that were traced back to their development and led to only one man. Gene Leroy Hart was a horribly violent man with a dark history of assault. Police closed in on him, and although there's evidence he was involved, he is eventually acquitted of the charges.
These are 8 horrifying facts that will probably keep you up at night. When Apollo 11 landed, it only had 20 seconds of remaining fuel. 4 months ago, a deceased rapper by the name Gunu had his corpse on stage while fans were partying around his body. The average person wastes 5 months of their lives waiting for red lights to turn green. Cruise ships have morgues, just in case someone, during the trip. If you have red eyes after swimming, it's not from chlorine. It's from the chlorine mixing with other people's urine. The furthest part of the ocean from land is Point Nemo. If you get stuck there, you're not coming back. Sunburn are your cells dying to avoid being cancerous. Most laugh tracks and shows are people from the 50s, which means you're hearing the laughter of dead people. Yeah, there's a lot more, like for part 14.
Her parents took her life after she refused to marry her cousin. 18-year-old Saman Abbas lived with her parents in northern Italy but were originally from Pakistan. She chose not to wear a head covering in public and would also post photos of her kissing her boyfriend in public, and this would make her parents very upset. In 2020, Saman's parents wanted her to travel to Pakistan for an arranged marriage with her cousin, but she refused. To get away from her parents, she lived for several months under the protection of social services but was tricked into going back after she received messages from them. Once Saman returned home, she mysteriously disappeared. On April 29th of 2021, CCTV footage captures 3 members of the family walking with spades, a crowbar, and a blue bag. The following day, separate footage shows Saman leaving the house with her parents and she was never seen again. Her body was eventually recovered near a farmhouse that wasn't too far away from her parents' home. An autopsy revealed she had suffered a broken neck bone from being strangled. Once Saman's family had unalived her, they immediately left Italy and went to Pakistan so they wouldn't be caught. Her uncle, who was also involved, was detained in Paris in 2021. Father was arrested in 2022, and at the time, her mother was on the run. In court, Saman's father claimed that he was innocent and that him and his wife only followed her that night because it was late and they were unhappy and they just wanted to see where she was going. The court convicted both parents and they were sentenced to life in prison.
These facial reconstructions helped identify victims, and they're downright creepy. In 2015, a body was discovered along the I-40 highway near Hinton, Oklahoma. The body was so badly decomposed that a forensic artist created this reconstruction hoping somebody would recognize her. She was identified over a year later, and her killer pleaded guilty in 2017 and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In 1994, a hiker stumbled across a skull near Windy Point, Colorado. These reconstructions were made, but the case remained cold for nearly 30 years. She became known as Windy Point Jane Doe. It wasn't until March of this year that she was identified as Susan Hobbs of Washington State. This reconstruction was done on a body that was found in New Hampshire in August of 1968. The unidentified body had 4 gunshot wounds. It wasn't until 2019 when John Doe was identified as Vermont resident Winston Morris.
Yesterday, 8 family members were found shot to death inside of a home in the small town of Enoch, Utah. They were all members of the same family, and police have determined that it was a murder-suicide. According to authorities, the bodies of 5 children and 3 adults were found inside the home suffering from gunshot wounds after police conducted a welfare check. Police determined that the father, 42-year-old Michael Haidt, shot his 5 children, his wife, his mother-in-law, and then himself. According to authorities, just 2 weeks ago on December 21st, Michael's wife filed for divorce, and ever since his mother-in-law had been supporting her. The children were ages 17 to 4 years old. Enoch, Utah is about 245 miles from Salt Lake City and is a really tight-knit community. City councilmen and other residents of the community are in complete shock and have described the Haidts as a wonderful family who were very well respected and well known in the area.
A 23-year-old Florida woman was posing as a 14-year-old girl to meet up with little boys. This is 23-year-old Alyssa Ann Zinger. She was first arrested in November for at least 30 acts with a middle school boy, and then sending explicit Snapchats to many more middle schoolers. Her persona was a 14-year-old homeschooled girl. She communicated with all of her victims through Snapchat. She got hit with a ton of charges, mainly CP charges, and that's on top of assault charges. Interestingly enough, her and the victim that she was with got caught shoplifting at Nordstrom in July. She lied to the police about her identity. She was born in 2001. She said she was born in 2009.
About you, and it's no one else like you is what they're getting. Positive vibes only. Shout out to King Saul's boss in the building. About you, and it's no one else like you.
Shout out to Sauce the boss, of course, man. Who's in the building, man? Shout out to Sauce the boss, of course, man. Who's in the building, man?